In the heart of a war-torn village, nestled in a valley surrounded by craggy mountains, a young seamstress named Amara lived in a small, dimly lit workshop. The wooden building was weathered and leaning, much like the spirit of the townsfolk who passed by it every day. The war had stolen their smiles, their loved ones, and their hope, but Amara refused to let it take her craft. Her hands worked tirelessly at her loom, weaving intricate patterns into fabrics destined for soldiers' uniforms, villagers' shrouds, and the rare festive attire for weddings that now seemed like relics of a forgotten time. Amara's mother, before she passed, had always said, "Every stitch holds a story. Let yours be a tale of hope." One evening, as Amara sat by the flickering light of her oil lamp, a stranger knocked on her door. He was a young soldier, not much older than her, carrying a torn cloak. His face was smeared with soot, and his eyes held a weariness that words could not capture. "Can you mend this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Amara nodded and set to work. As she stitched, she noticed the lining of the cloak was embroidered with a phrase in tiny letters. "Even the darkest night must end for the sun to rise." "Who wrote this?" she asked, running her fingers over the words. The soldier smiled faintly. "My sister. She said it keeps me brave." The idea struck her like lightning. If such small words could inspire bravery, could her craft do the same? The next morning, Amara rummaged through her chest of coloured threads and began a project unlike any other. She stitched messages of hope, resilience, and defiance into every piece of fabric she worked on. Courage blooms in the heart of the oppressed, she wove into the hem of a farmer's coat. Freedom is nearer than it seems, she inscribed on the bandages for wounded soldiers. The messages were subtle, hidden in patterns, linings, and seams, places where they wouldn't be easily noticed by the enemy forces patrolling the village, but those who received her work noticed. Word spread quickly. Villagers began flocking to Amara's workshop, not just for her skill, but for the quiet strength her creations brought them. The local baker started hiding bread loaves with messages embroidered into their cloth wrappings, passing them to hungry refugees. A blacksmith hammered the phrases into hidden parts of weapons. Amara's threads became a symbol of resistance, and the village began to transform. The once muted streets hummed with an unspoken determination. The villagers held their heads higher, their steps firmer, as if the invisible threads of Amara's words bound them together. One fateful day, the enemy commander entered her shop. His cold eyes swept across the room, and his gloved hand rested on the hilt of his sword. He picked up a scarf Amara had just finished embroidering. "What does this pattern mean?" he asked sharply, his voice as cutting as his blade. Amara's heart pounded in her chest, but she smiled calmly. "It's an old design from my mother's time, a symbol of protection." The commander eyed her suspiciously, but left without another word. Amara exhaled shakily, knowing her work was becoming riskier. One night, a group of resistance fighters knocked on her door. Among them was the young soldier who had first brought her the cloak. "We're planning to reclaim the village," he said. "Your messages, they've done more than you know. People believe again. Will you join us?" Amara hesitated. She had always been a quiet force, working in the background, but she realized her threads alone were not enough. She nodded. "Let me sew your banners." When the resistance struck, they carried banners woven with Amara's finest work. Under a blood-red sunrise, villagers armed with nothing but pitchforks and determination overpowered the enemy forces. Amara's words echoed in their hearts. "Together, we are unbreakable." After the victory, the village rebuilt itself. Amara's workshop became a sanctuary, a place where stories of courage and hope were stitched into garments for generations to come. Her legacy lived on, proving that even the smallest threads, when woven with care, could mend the deepest wounds. Hope is a fragile thread, but when intertwined with courage and community, it becomes a fabric strong enough to withstand even the fiercest storms.